Hey, friends, thanks for joining us again. I have on the line one of our best SGT Report friends out there, Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization. Harley, welcome back.
Hello, Sean. How are you?
Well, I am just terrific, and it's always a pleasure to have you on because there's a lot of people in the audience, Harley, that really care about doing the right thing, and then there's guys like you that are taking action, organizations like LaRouche taking action. I understand from you now that 20 states have Glass-Steagall legislation pending, and 4 states have passed it, Maine among them, which is home to Angus King. And I just want to say for the audience that Angus King is a new hero of mine. Search on SGT Report this headline: Senator Lindsey Graham licks the boots of Pentagon brass, but Senator Angus King calls it astoundingly disturbing that the Obama administration claims power to wage endless war across the globe. Harley, I'm going to throw it to you. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I think I'd like to say to your audience, because I know from communicating with them, some have called me, some have emailed me, that they want to see something change, but they are skeptical, pessimistic. It's their experience that you can't win. Now, what I want to bring to your audience today is a report that as the criminality continues and deepens, there are fractures that are appearing among the criminals, a fallout among thieves, you might say. But also there's an openness now in the population. We're beginning to see change. And nowhere is this more evident than the response to the filing of a Glass-Steagall bill in the U.S. Senate last week by Senator Tom Harkin, which means now we have Glass-Steagall in the House and the Senate. And so it actually means it could become law. Now, this is a bill that Dodd-Frank was drafted to prevent. The whole point of Dodd-Frank and the Volcker rules and ring fencing and the Vickers rules and the Lycanen Commission in Europe is to prevent a return to Glass-Steagall, which would essentially not only end bailouts, but would force commercial banks to stop speculating. And this is now a real possibility. And as you mentioned, there are 20 state legislatures that have drafted memorial resolutions to their congressional delegations demanding the passage of the H.R. 129, the Glass-Steagall legislation, and it's passed in 4 of those states. And then, of course, the other thing we can talk about is that as these scandals unfold, hopefully, if the Republicans get their eyes off Hillary Clinton in 2016 and focus on Barack Obama in 2013, we'll be able to impeach this guy because the scandals are revealing the tip of the iceberg so far, but they're revealing the criminality that's incumbent on this president. So I think the message from me today is no one should give up hope, but you have to fight. It's not going to happen on its own, and we're seeing a lot of citizen activists storming state legislatures, visiting their congressmen, and we're seeing some change.
Yeah, people are ready to stand up and take action. And with credit to you guys, when we talked back in February and March, you folks at the LaRouche Group had boots on the ground in Washington, D.C., passing out flyers, talking to senators, talking to congressmen, talking to people about reintroducing Glass-Steagall because we know that this system is doomed. In your words, a fallout among thieves. We know that the end is coming for this criminally corrupt financial system. So I'm not saying we can save this system with Glass-Steagall, but whatever system comes next, damn well better have Glass-Steagall in place, or we're just going to get more of the same.
Well, and the problem you have is that if you're waiting for this to occur on its own, it won't happen. I mean, I've watched now as one country after another in Europe has had a debate on banking separation, and they've had in Germany and France, they've passed so-called banking reforms, which are like Dodd-Frank. They're favorable to the bankers, and the bankers protest and whine and complain, but they're spending in the United States tens of millions of dollars to keep congressmen away from Glass-Steagall. Now, the most recent development is, as we talked about last time in Cyprus, this is now openly being discussed as the model, the bail-in, the stealing of depositors' funds, only now they're calling it investments. That is, when you put your money in a bank account, did you know that's an investment in the bank, according to people like Lycanen, who is the head of the European Union's Banking Reform Committee? And now, here's something I've found since I was on last time, Sean. Dodd-Frank, under Title II, legitimizes the bail-in for American banks. and it's under a section called banking resolution. In other words, what do you do when a bank is bankrupt? And what they're saying is that, well, bailouts are getting too much out of favor. People don't want bailouts anymore. They don't want the Federal Reserve or the U.S. government to give money to bankers who speculated and lost the money. So what's their option? The bail-in. And what they're saying is, well, we will still recognize the insurance of the FDIC. That is, we won't take depositors' money below a certain account. Well, you can't trust them for that. They're desperate. These banks are continuing to hold on to trillions of dollars in toxic assets.
Yeah, and we see that same bail-in language being used now in Canada, right? Under Stephen Harper, they've made it legal in the future for these banks to literally seize people's accounts in order to save, quote-unquote, save the banks.
Exactly, and in Switzerland also. This originated with Credit Suisse, and in November of last year, the Bank of England and the FDIC issued a report saying that this is the way to avoid bailouts, to have bail-ins. And so the Cyprus case, and as we talked about, Cyprus is small. It's $10 billion in debt, and it was all debt owed to the European Central Bank. So they stole people's deposits, and they did limit to above 100,000. So if you have 100,000 or less euros in your account, they didn't take it yet. But if you have over 100,000, they took 37.5% of that. They just took it and used it to pay off other banks on the existing bank debt, and then put in your deposit the equivalent amount of stock in a bank which is already bankrupt. Then they froze an additional 22.5%, which means 60% of your deposit is no longer yours. And of the other 40%, they put limits on how much you can take out. Now, after a few squawks from the Cyprus parliament, they approved it by a 29 to 27 vote. And now they're saying this is what Italy should do, this is what Spain should do, and this will become the law in Europe once they establish a unified banking regulatory system under the European Central Bank. Now, this is exactly what will happen here under Dodd-Frank Title II. So we've got to repeal Dodd-Frank and replace it with Glass-Steagall.
Now, listening to you, I sit and I realize that, what I just said was I'm counting on a financial collapse of this system and a new system to roll out. But as we've seen in the gold and silver markets, as we've seen with the paper manipulation of the precious metals, these cartels have so much power and they're so unwilling to relinquish any of it that they may just be able to limp this system along for another year, 2 years, 5 years. I don't know, because everybody who thought it would collapse by now has been wrong. So to your point, we've got to implement Glass-Steagall because we've reached the point of no return in terms of there being no more rule of law. We need to re-implement rule of law.
Well, and to amplify your point, there's no telling how long this system can be held together. Right now we're seeing something, a stock market bubble. We're seeing a new housing bubble. But it's not, the argument of the Obama administration is that the recovery is starting to take hold, and that's why more people are buying houses. Most of the houses that are being purchased in large numbers by small investors who are taking low-price houses and 0% interest to buy them. And then they're going to turn around and rent them to people who can't get mortgages because they don't have good jobs. Of the so-called 6 million jobs created by Obama, more than two-thirds of them are low-wage, temporary, or part-time. These are not people who are qualifying for mortgages. So we see two new bubbles in the commercial mortgage and the housing mortgage markets, which means they can continue to buy and sell mortgage-backed securities that are worthless. And then secondly, the stock market bubble. How many people are getting suckered into the stock market now because they're, just as they were suckered in on gold for the wrong reason, to make a short-term profit? So I think you're absolutely right. They're going to do everything they can to sustain it, including the bail-in policy. That's how they think they can sustain this. Plus, austerity, killer cuts. And we're seeing suicide rates up in Greece. We're seeing hospitals shut down. It's happening in Cyprus. It's in Spain. It's in Italy. We see Obama doing it here with his attack on Social Security and Medicare, but also on defense spending.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you saw this article recently, Harley, but suicide is now one of the leading causes of death in America, even more so than car accidents, people killing themselves. I mean, that's
right.
How
Exactly.
bad it's getting. And you're right, the bankers will eat out our sustenance until we stop them. Now, I want to circle back to the impeachment of Barack Obama. You brought it up, and it could not be more important to discuss, because one of the things that kills me as these scandals are handed to us on a silver platter, right? The Justice Department running guns down to Mexico for Fast and Furious, the Benghazi scandal, the IRS targeting patriot groups and constitutionalists, the Justice Department targeting AP reporters and Fox News reporters. These scandals should bring down any president. But one of the things that just kills me is this false right-left paradigm, which you and I have talked about so frequently, Harley. I want to cite an example. I was watching Fox News at the club the other day, right? I was on the treadmill, and there's this roundtable discussion show on in the afternoons called The Five.
Right.
And it drives me crazy because these people are clearly being paid to quelch and to quiet and to remunerate about the problems without ever showing the anger and vitriol that they ought to be showing. And it drives me nuts because what I heard one or two of them say repeatedly is, impeachment won't happen. Impeachment's not going to happen, and Republicans are hurting themselves by even bringing it up, which allows you to know that whether you're watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, you are not getting the whole story. Because if anyone should be brought down for this stuff, it's Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder and their entire posse.
What we're seeing from the media is what I call confetti, distraction. You know, they're covering the stories, but then you see, for example, in Benghazi, what's the real issue in Benghazi? It's that the Obama administration is in a de facto alliance with al-Qaeda terrorists. It's not just that he tried to cover up what happened in Benghazi to protect his image as the fighter against al-Qaeda. It's to cover up the fact that the U.S. armed al-Qaeda knowingly in the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group that overthrew Gaddafi. And I think there will now be some whistleblowers coming forward, if they can make it, who will say that what Ambassador Stevens was trying to do in Benghazi, which he didn't agree with, was buy back weapons from these al-Qaeda fighters to keep them from falling into the hands of our enemies. And maybe that's why he wasn't protected and he was allowed to be killed, because the policy was to send those arms from Libya to al-Qaeda in Syria. So the real scandal here is not whether Obama was sleeping in the back room when this was going on, or we didn't send soldiers in to protect the consulate. It's that we've been in an alliance with the same terror networks that were behind 9/11, that killed Americans in Afghanistan and Iraq, are turning Iraq into a completely unstable civil war zone, and are trying to destroy the Assad regime and the Iranian government. For what purpose? For the purposes of spreading a Salafi jihadist regime throughout the whole of the region. And what's the next target for them? It's going to be the United States and Europe. And I might add that in Syria itself, there are a large number of Chechen Islamic fighters who are part of the rebels who are trying to bring down the Assad regime. So here you have the real perfect storm of evidence that could bring Obama down. Now, the Republicans have a problem on this because John McCain and Lindsey Graham supported the U.S. policy of dumping Gaddafi and dumping Assad, which means they're in on this de facto alliance.
Yes.
So that's why they're trying to turn it into an argument over the talking points. Look, Susan Rice is no damn good. She should be thrown out immediately. But it's Obama and the people who control Obama who are responsible for backing this Anglo-Saudi jihadist regime.
But let me jump in, because it's also the people on the right, okay? It's also John McCain. It's also Senator Lindsey Graham. And now we've come full circle from where we started, because I really want people who haven't seen this Democracy Now! Piece to go to SGT Report and type in, into the search bar, type in Senator Lindsey Graham licks boots of Pentagon brass, because, again, it was Senator Angus King who heard the exchange between Lindsey Graham and Pentagon officials, Michael Sheehan, and the general counsel there at the Pentagon at an official hearing talking about endless war being A-OK for the next 20 years in the Pentagon's mind. And why? Because Al-Qaeda hit us on 9/11. Because Al-Qaeda, that's the reason. And Senator Lindsey Graham couldn't contain his glee in saying, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. We need to go wherever the wars are. We need to go wherever Al-Qaeda is, that's where the battlefield is. And to your point, Harley, that even means that as soon as they say Al-Qaeda is on our domestic shores, then the United States becomes a battlefield. And in the words of Senator Angus King, he called the exchange between Lindsey Graham and those men at the Pentagon the most astoundingly disturbing thing he's ever heard, because what they've done is they've rewritten the Constitution. They've dismantled the Constitution. And they continue to use Al-Qaeda as the excuse, even as they arm and support Al-Qaeda in Libya and in Syria and all over the Middle East.
All you have to do is look at what they did in Boston, where they did the lockdown. You see that they have in place the measures not to protect us from Al-Qaeda, but to protect them from the anger of the population under conditions of collapse and social unrest, which brings us back to the economic factor. The only way they can save the system is going to be by savaging what's left of the middle class in this country, which they're already doing. And so you see that the potential here is to bring down the bankrupt banks, because these banks have power as long as they're allowed to keep trading back and forth toxic assets, draw upon the Federal Reserve for cash, steal your deposits. As long as they can do that and no one's complaining about it, they can stay in business in one form or another. And when they crash, they'll just set up a new system. What Glass-Steagall does is it says that all these gambling debts are no longer the responsibility of the depositors or of the taxpayer. They're the responsibility of the speculators, and they have to eat them. If they can sell them and get something from it, fine. That should be used to pay their fines and pay people back who they've stolen from. But we're not going to honor those gambling debts anymore. That's what Glass-Steagall does. So it ends the bailout, and then it raises the question of the banking system being transformed from a speculative casino into, once again, loans for the real economy. And that's, as you know, medium and small banks are cut off from credit. That's why there's no real recovery. The only credit is for the swindlers and the speculators. So with Glass-Steagall, we now have the possibility with the Harkin bill in the Senate and H.R. 129 in the House to take the power away from Wall Street and the City of London. And you combine that with the fact that these are the main sponsors of the Obama regime, which is a criminal enterprise in itself. And you mentioned Holder. What a convenient thing for Holder to say, well, since I've authorized so many of these in the past, I had to recuse myself from the AP case. Well, someone should have asked him, give us a listing of how many times you've done this. As one journalist said, this is not a war on whistleblowers, it's a war on investigative reporters. It's the end of the free press in the United States because it's essentially establishing an Official Secrets Act, which means that not only can classified documents not be leaked, but the people they're leaked to are not allowed to cover them, which is, in the U.S., we've always allowed these reports to come out. In Britain, they don't. Now they're saying they're not going to allow investigative journalists to report on these things. Yeah.
Well, and Jeremy Scahill has done an absolutely wonderful job covering the fact that this White House has had a war on whistleblowers, an unprecedented war on whistleblowers. So now the fact that they'd be targeting investigative journalists, I mean, that just stands to reason. And because... Sure. And because Obama's such a silver-tongued devil, the people on the left who support him seem to only be capable of willful ignorance, because if they were merely paying attention, they would see the truth.
Well, and we're seeing some of that. We're seeing that with people on the, as you mentioned, King, and quite a few others on the drone war, on the spying, the warrantless wiretaps, and so on. There's so many reasons for this guy to go. The key is that we can now say the potential to remove him is there as it's never been there before. There's a grouping in the establishment now that sees him as used up because he can't get things through the Congress in any case. He has to do it through executive order. And I think that many Americans have had a belly full of this. They're no longer willing to tolerate it. So there's a possibility for change. Now, don't think that the establishment would not be above throwing out Obama and trying to rig something else. So that's why you can't just go for impeachment. You have to go for the Glass-Steagall to take the power away from the Wall Street banks. And what we've done with the LaRouche movement, is, as we were talking about earlier, is we've gone to state legislatures. And in the state legislatures, we're getting Republicans joining Democrats in the calls for return to Glass-Steagall. The bill in the U.S. House, out of 62 co-sponsors, includes only 3 Republicans so far. We've got to get the Republicans in on that. If the Republicans don't like bailouts, they should go with Glass-Steagall. People like Richard Shelby from the Senate, who was one of the few senators who voted against the repeal of Glass-Steagall, his Alabama legislature voted to support the Glass-Steagall bill. So I think that this is a moment that I've been waiting for at least the last decade, going back to the beginning of Bush and the whole Obama period. It's more than a decade now. We can take back the country, but that means you have to do something, not just whine and complain. And I think now we have the tools to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. What I love about this, Harley, is that it is actionable. And you say there's 20 states with Glass-Steagall legislation now pending. That means people need to pick up their phones, or better yet, go down to their state house and find their representatives and get some FaceTime, and make this a priority for those people, because more and more people in the House and in the Senate are waking up. More of these representatives are waking up. You know why? Because people are genuinely angry, and they're kind of being forced to wake up, and that's the good thing. So.
Also, Sean, one thing interesting, a lot of the freshman House members came out of state legislatures. And the thing about state legislatures is that usually they don't pay much attention to memorial resolutions. But they all know that their economies are not recovering. And they live in the district. They're not in the Washington bubble. And if you start getting an outpouring of anger coming from state legislatures, then congressmen start paying attention. And we're seeing this. I just did a town hall meeting up in San Carlos, California, and of the people there, over half of them had been in Sacramento. And they came back with stories of pulling a legislator aside and talking to him. The guy said, "Well, this sounds good. Talk to my staff." And they were saying, "The hell with that. Your staff is a bunch of bums. I'm talking to you." And I think Americans have to stop being afraid to confront power. These are just people. In many cases, they're people who are corrupt. And if they actually see real human beings in front of them challenging them, you'll find maybe they'll talk to you. Maybe they'll be interested. And I think that's the hope, that a courageous minority of the American people speak up for the future and act on the future in this way. And that's why we've made some progress.
Absolutely, Harley. And I think what is inspiring is we've seen the precedent set. We've seen examples set by good people like Luke Rudowski over at We Are Change, getting video cameras into the faces of these people and asking the tough questions that the mainstream mockingbird media won't ask. And he's inspired an entire movement called We Are Change. There's We Are Change branches all over the planet now of people taking action and standing up. And I want to reject the voices that say the system is so corrupt and the representatives are so corrupt, you just need to let the system collapse, because we can't look to any one man like Ron Paul. We can't trust anybody. I get that. I understand the perspective, but I reject it, because as we've seen, this system might limp along for another 5 years. And if we stand down and do nothing, and if we don't support the good senators and the good congressmen that are finding their voices, then that's on us. We need to take action. We need to call those guys, and we need to show the good, honest, honorable ones among them our support.
Well, and a collapse will mean chaos. And in chaos, even the most hardy and capable survivalists, you're going to be fighting police states. You're going to be fighting armies. And we're better off using the legal mechanisms that we have while we can to win this fight. And so I think the important point here is that they may be able to limp along, or they may not. It may crash. We're facing food shortages. We're facing the breakdown of water systems and transportation systems and sewage and waste management. We're facing a total disaster. But we do have something in our country still called the Constitution. And to the extent we use it And to the extent we awaken citizens and take those who are awake and give them a direction to move. And just one final point I'll make. On this question of are there good people in the House and Senate, most people who run for office are initially decent people. The problem is that we play a game called parties and personalities. And what we should instead put forward is principles. We have to have an approach that's principled, that's based on a real understanding of history and the science of economics and physical economy, not the gambling game of money. And if we can get away from just partisanship and personalities and get to this question of what's it going to take to put this economy back on its feet, I think we've got a chance. But the media plays this game of parties like you choose a sports team.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that they do, which absolutely, it just infuriates me, is, and they do it on the right, they do it on Fox News all the time, is they like to play the game of let's focus on what caused the problem so this never happens again. We've seen that happen through every administration going back to Nixon, and I am sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of new people coming into office and saying, let's not look back, let's look forward, let's not prosecute criminals, let's move forward. We're not going to throw stones, we're going to move forward. Meanwhile, the rule of law collapses on its face, and that's the most disgusting part.
And the criminals reload and they're back on top.
Yeah, that's right. And so these principles that you're talking about are very easily understandable principles. They are the principles of liberty. They are the principles of an honest monetary system. They are the principles of enforcing the rule of law and sending the bad guys to prison for a very, very long time. And those, I think, are becoming more and more palpable and evident. Those principles are becoming more evident to people as the criminality becomes absolutely blatant and in your face. I've said it a million times if I've said it once, Harley, and it's this. Once you've seen the Matrix, you can't unsee it. And people are starting to see the Matrix.
I agree with that. And what I'll do, because I have had very good response from your listeners in the past, is I'm going to give out my email address at the end of the program, and people can send me an email if you want to do something. If you want to know more, if you want to talk to me, send me your phone number. But I'm encouraging people, now is the time where handfuls of people who move will create motion among larger numbers. So you can contact me at Harley SCH. It's HarleySCH @gmail.com. HarleySCH @gmail.com. I'll get back to you. It may take me a little while, but I'll get back to you because I want people to realize there are options and things you can do, and that we'll put you together with people. If you're in a state that doesn't have Glass-Steagall in your legislature, let's get to work on it.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. Thanks for that, Harley. I think I really appreciate that. That is just such an actionable thing that people can do. I've said it before to people who have asked me, if you're for real, how are you not shut down? How's the government not shut down your website? People accuse Alex Jones of the same thing. They accuse Ron Paul of the same thing. They accuse, probably Luke Rudowski of the same thing. And my point has always been that I'm a real guy. Okay, this started from a place of passion and honesty, and because, fortunately, we live in a country that's still free enough and still does protect, our Bill of Rights to the degree that we have free speech, I've never had anything happen. I've never had my website shut down. I've had some malware attacks, but the point is I'm real, the website's real, I'm taking action, and so can every single person listening to this message. Harley, I want to thank you for the action you've taken, because you and the LaRouche organization single-handedly really helped reintroduce Glass-Steagall, and I think we got a real shot at it now.
Well, and again, I'm looking forward to hearing from people, and maybe you can put the email address up on your website with this posting, and I'm looking forward to having people who are really ready to do something, take some positive action. All
right, very good. I will put up your email address in the more information section below this video. I want to thank everybody who does take the time to email Harley respectfully. Be conscious of his time. Don't make it too long, and he'll get back to you, which I think is very generous because I know how much time that takes. Harley Schlanger, the national spokesperson for the Lyndon LaRouche organization. What's your website?
It's LaRouchePAC.com, and if you go on the website, there's an icon for Glass-Steagall, and it'll give you an updated list of who's signed on, who's supporting it. Also, we have a bill in the Italian Parliament now because Italy's going to hell. So it's a very interesting thing, and while you're there, browse around and see what else is there. But we do have the Glass-Steagall update on the LaRouchePAC.com.
Very good. Harley Schlanger, thanks so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to speak with you every couple of months, and I want to thank every single person who's tuning in to listen to this. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for liking. I want to thank you for sharing it with others. We can take our country back. Thanks for listening. Bye, Harley.
Okay, Sean. Bye.
Bye.